A podcaster walks into a bar. Don't worry, there's no corny joke coming. So up at the bar, this person's looking for a specific kind of craft beer, one with the South in its name. Instead, they find beers with names of other places across the country.
All right, let's see what we got. West Coast IPA, New England Hazy. What else we got?
Despite these labels, in the last decade, the craft industry's boom has steadily spread across southern states. There are thousands of breweries in the region. But what is a southern beer? I'm Charlie Shelton Orman, and this week on The Broadside, we have one question. Can you put a place in a pint?
Hey, this is Anissa. I just wanted to take a moment to let you know that we can only do what we do with your support. That allows us to bring you original reporting every week about the stories that matter to you, about our home, this fascinating place that we live in. To support the show, go to this week's episode description and click the link, or go to WUNC.org and click on the donate link in the upper right-hand corner. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the show.
Visit any brewery, and you're likely going to see some similar things no matter where you are. There's a definite vibe.
I think a lot of people, when they visualize beer, they picture, steel fermentation tanks and an industrial space.
Open rafters, some exposed brick, a kind of rustic elegance. It can all start to feel a little generic. But Sean Lilly Wilson wants people to take a closer look at a brewery beyond those steel tanks. Or let's say taste a closer look.
We know that there are some ingredients that feel distinctly Southern, whether it's persimmon or pawpaw or the locally grown basil.
You can find these ingredients within some of the beers at Fullsteam Brewery in Durham, North Carolina. Sean founded the business in 2010. Back then, the craft beer craze was in its early days, and breweries were few and far between, especially in the South.
Part of the discovery from when we started in 2010 was we didn't really know what this Southern beer thing meant. We're on a quest.
But in the past 15 years, the industry has bubbled up to be a big business. In 2022 alone, craft beer contributed more than $400 billion to the U.S. economy. And now there are about 400 breweries in North Carolina, making the state a major player.
Just to be able to see North Carolina grow into a full-fledged destination for craft beer, it's been immensely rewarding.
But back to our question. What makes a beer unique and distinctly Southern? What does it mean to have a taste of the South infused into this popular beverage? For Sean and his brewers at Fullsteam, their connection to the South has a name. It's short and catchy. Plow to pint.
Plow to pint is a phrase that we coined way back when as sort of a riff on farm to table. And it's just the idea of trying to contextualize beer as agricultural.
Within this is a pursuit for local ingredients literally rooted in the soil. It includes the Southern commodities that Sean listed earlier, like persimmon and pawpaw, the list goes on. These are the fun things, the flavors that brewers put into beer to make it special.
We get this sort of halo effect from having these unique ingredients being showcased in beers with what we call adjuncts or added flavors.
But at its core, Fullsteam's Plow to Pint philosophy is focused on beer's fundamental ingredients, the absolute basics. To brew beer, you need 4 simple things: malt, hops, yeast, and water. Sean says Fullsteam's emphasis on local ingredients is the foundation of what they call the Southern beer economy,
which is our kind of collective analysis of how much we've spent on local ingredients. But the foundation of the Southern beer economy and what we're doing is really local grain.
But how do you know the beer you're drinking is truly local? For a guarantee, Sean says, look to the can.
If you see that Plow to Pint symbol, means it's brewed with 100% North Carolina malt.
So thinking about Plow to Pint and Fullsteam's approach to brewing in the South, what then is a Southern beer for you? What does that taste like? Maybe what does that feel like for you?
For Fullsteam, for us, I tend to think of it as what we call quietly confident, or beers that express a taste of place, a seasonality, an agricultural mindset, but they don't do so obnoxiously or over the top. I would say that it's pretty obvious that anything that says they're distinctly Southern would probably not be too brash or brazen in its flavor profile or in its ingredient base.
After my chat with Sean, I kept coming back to this idea that a beer that's brewed in the South can be a type of vessel. It can connect you to the land that's around you, whether that's through profiling local ingredients right there on the can, or by boosting the flavor of the place where you enjoy it.
Cheers! Cheers!
A moment ago, I talked about beer's 4 main ingredients. Now I'm going to propose 4 alternative ingredients. They'll help us on the Southern beer journey. Where, who, why, and how. So in Plow to Pint, we have the where. Where did the ingredients come from? Now, what about the who?
A Southern beer for me is about who made it and the story behind it.
This is Tinu. She's a documentary filmmaker based in the Raleigh-Durham area. For her, brewing carries something special, a lineage.
My grandmother brewed what's called burukutu. It's a traditional fermented drink in Western African countries, and the base grain is a sorghum. So then you also think about the connections between Southern foodways and African foodways, and how so much of this Southeastern diet is really African in its origin. And you see that even in brewing history and beer.
Tinu is currently working on a documentary about craft beer, showing how brewers today are building on those origins. Her focus is on Black women in the South who brew.
And Black folks seeing themselves in spaces that they typically weren't seen, and brewing being one of them. And I really wanted to talk about this particular craft through the experience of Black women because of the ways in which it's been associated not just around certain racial dynamics, but around gender as well. And the fact is, brewing started with women, like historically. It's like, I think the fact that beer has been with civilization since the beginning is like something worth paying attention to.
Tinu says that when people think about who is producing and consuming beer today, they tend to imagine white men, maybe more on the blue-collar side. But beer's backstory doesn't really reinforce that modern stereotype.
One of the things I think is important is to understand that if brewing in this craft has been a part of civilizations and communities for time immemorial, that is technology that came with people, no matter where they went. It might have been technology that was exchanged, through the ways in which countries and people groups interacted. But even the transatlantic slave trade.
In fact, many of the earliest brewers in the South were enslaved, brewing in homes with their own style.
I think that sometimes we forget that people who were brought here against their own will came with immense amount of knowledge and intelligence and talent. So I really think it's important to name that and to connect with that.
As far as a flagship beer for the South, Tinu says there isn't one currently out there. But she's partial to a bright, dry, and aromatic Belgian beer, the Saison.
I personally feel like we could lobby for a Southern Saison, but give me another year. We'll work on that. But so I think it's coming. I think Southern something is coming. We're due.
It's coming. And in the meantime, how are you seeing that play out in some of the beers that you're enjoying? That distinctive Southernness in certain beers.
I think it's like a lot of in the ingredients that folks are using, the types of grains, the types of adjuncts, thinking about what is indigenous to this area, what is indigenous to my culture, and then how do I infuse that and bring that through in how I brew. So it's folks tapping into the influences, the music, the people around them, the times that they're in, and really using beer as like their canvas.
Just ahead, we find out why one beer in particular is such a good fit for folks down in the bayou. That's after a short break.
AI chatbots parse information. Have you ever considered their romantic potential? In a new 3-part series on love and AI from Embodied, we'll explore the intricacies of human-bot relationships, learn about the past, present, and future of sex robots, and meet people uploading conversations with their loved ones into software in hopes that it can help them grieve. New episodes drop each Friday in February, starting on the 9th. Subscribe and follow Embodied so you don't miss it.
North Carolina has more than 500 towns and cities, each with its own character, challenges, and stories to tell.
Change is difficult, and we're going through a tremendous amount of change.
I'm Colin Campbell, Capitol Bureau Chief at WUNC Radio. Join me as I travel the state of North Carolina to hear from people trying to make their communities better. The project is Main Street NC, and you can listen on the WUNC Politics podcast.
We're back with The Broadside. I'm Charlie Shelton Ormond. Let's now go on down to the Gulf Coast. Sometime last summer, outside of New Orleans. It was a hot, sticky day. One of those where the humidity is so thick, it's like you can see it.
I was sweaty in these breweries. I was hot. The sweating brim of my hat is what I think I mentioned, because that's what stuck out to me, is that I was just sweaty.
Owen Racer was on the hunt for the right beer, one that could help cool him down.
There's something about, drinking on the Mississippi River where it's so hot. Drinking a hazy IPA just doesn't really fit. To leave it at that.
As he checked what was on tap, Owen pulled out his notebook. He's a freelance reporter, and a few months ago, he wrote a piece for the online outlet Good Beer Hunting about craft beer in the New Orleans area.
I had an assumption that I wanted to break this stereotype of it being a cocktail-centric city, and I wanted to confirm or deny my assumption.
What he found was a modest but thriving craft beer scene leaning into a distinctive Gulf Coast culture.
You get the feel as a consumer that it's just kind of this non-pretentious, laid-back, social gathering, kind of like old-style pub feel, if you will.
And it was in one of these laid-back spots, Fly Llama Brewery in Biloxi, Mississippi, where Owen found the beer he was looking for, the perfect fit to sip, a nice, light lager.
That's what I drank, that's what I wanted, that's what they recommended, and that's what the brewers were drinking, so...
Right. It's what you kept coming back to.
Exactly.
Now, there are many, many different styles of beer. Each person who drinks beer has their own preferences. Overall, hazy IPA is actually the most popular craft beer by a long shot in the Southeast. It's a hoppy, citrusy, heavier beer, usually higher in alcohol. So why then did Owen come across all these folks specifically drinking lagers with lower alcohol percentage?
Lagers are the best fitting for that environment. There's this social atmosphere in the South, and specifically in New Orleans, of passion, excitement, energy that encourages more consumption.
Especially on those sweltering summer days. It's evidence that where you're located in the South, with its climate and its culture, can dictate why people are choosing one drink over others.
It's an environment that is, you could say, intoxicating, socially and, literally. And lagers are the good fit for that.
But a good lager in the Gulf Coast requires a lot of one crucial ingredient: water. Brewing beer in general already demands using lots of water. And making sure you have clean water is essential for your beer's flavor. Because places on the Gulf Coast, like New Orleans, have such a low elevation, Owen says folks in the area have to heavily treat the water to make it clean.
Then you get into this whole conversation of, well, you have to do that because the water is historically filled with a whole host of things, whether it's salt water or lead, or pick your poison for a really horrible way to put it, of the water issues that the city has. It's like, well, you have to do these things because the water is not ready to be brewed with. And so the relationship with water is complex.
So Brewery's specific location in the South, with all its complexities, can influence why some brewers gravitate toward a beer like a lager. Location can also affect how they make it, how they handle things like water as they brew, whether it's on the Gulf Coast or deep in the Appalachian Mountains.
We have a really, unique to us and really pure source of, we call it Appalachian well water.
My last stop in the Southern Beer Tour is in western North Carolina. Sitting outside of Lake James, nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, is Fonta Flora Brewery. It's on 15 acres in the community of Nebo, complete with some big steel brewing tanks, a tap room, and 2 wells for water.
So all of the water that goes into the products that we make.
Todd Boera is one of the founders of Fonta Flora and its creative director.
We don't say Southern in particular. We talk about Appalachia. Our driving mission is to be utilizing cool ingredients, maybe specifically native to the Southeast, to Appalachia.
Some of those ingredients Todd and his crew toss into the mix are growing right in the brewery's backyard. He showed me around on a sunny, but chilly, winter afternoon.
This was the plot right here, the first one that's bare, that has crimson clover growing in it. Prior to that, this past year, we grew a variety of wheat called red turkey.
Todd is just wired to ponder all the different things in nature his brewery can use. Similar to Fullsteam in Durham, that includes stuff like the persimmon and the pawpaw, a native fruit that grows wild throughout Appalachia.
We have a pawpaw orchard that we started here. We have about 70 trees in the ground.
It also includes some native nuts.
And the chestnut is hard to talk about Appalachia and not talk about the chestnut.
And even different types of wood.
We have a Baltic porter with shagbark hickory, a Schwarzbier with white oak, and a West Coast IPA with maple bark.
Todd's ability to identify these eclectic ingredients and what could fit into a brew comes from his passion to forage, going out into the wild and figuring out what's what.
The idea of foraging, too, is just, there's something so romantic about a thing that is it's kind of forbidden in a way. It's like you go into a grocery store and you see what's available to you, but then you realize that there's a whole world out there of it really just kind of opens up this sense of empowerment when you're walking through a forest or, pasture or whatever, and you're just kind of looking around and you're just oh, I know what all this stuff is.
So for you personally, being someone who's very agricultural minded, why beer? Why bring that passion into beer specifically?
Because beer, at no fault of its own, really needs it the most. I talk about this a lot, when referencing wineries never really lost a connection to the land, to agriculture. And historically, especially in this country, that was true of breweries. It just became this really big industrial thing. Everyone's just used to seeing Budweiser and Coors and just these really large breweries. And that's not how brewing, started. Beer is agriculture. I think that connection was lost through the, industrialization and it becoming a commodity. And so beer needs that attention more than ever because that connection was lost.
After our chat, it was time to try it out, to see what the taste of a place was all about. Todd graciously gave me a recommendation.
Speaking of wood beers, called Pine Zips, we call it a coniferous style India Pale Ale, where we cut down an eastern white pine from our property and utilize essentially the whole tree in the making of the beer. So it's resinous, piney, just a really great IPA.
Hey, how are you? I'll do the Pine Zips, please.
Pine Zips? Yeah, totally.
All right, got the Pine Zips. Let's see. Oh, wow. It's very good. So, what's a Southern beer? There isn't one flavor or one type that takes a crown, but that's what makes it stand out. Like the South as a place, you can't put one label on it. Its power comes from its complexity. The mountains of Western Carolina look, feel, and taste a lot different from the Gulf Coast. and consider where its contents come from, who made it, why it was made, and how it got into your hand. This episode was produced by me, Charlie Shelton Ormond. Our editor is Jared Walker. Sean Rue and Al Wodarski provided audio engineering support. And special thanks to Brian Roth. Check out his work at Good Beer Hunting. The Broadside is a production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC. You can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating or review or tell a friend to listen. I'm Charlie Shelton Ormond. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back again next week.